Welcome students. My name is Boniface Mduguru, a biology teacher. I'm happy again to meet you today so that I can present to you some important concepts in human being reproduction. Last time we saw the process of gametogenesis in human being, but also before that we saw the human reproductive systems and how different parts of the human reproductive systems performs its work. Therefore today we are going to see the concept of menstruation cycle and Australis cycle. These concepts, they are also known as reproductive cycle, occurring in all mammals. Before I start going into different aspects regarding to menstruation cycle and also cycle, let me tell you what I intend to cover at the end of this presentation. Dear students, I expect to cover the following. One, the concept of menstruation. And Australis cycle. But also you'll have opportunity to know the importance of menstruation cycle. But also, I expect to cover the hormones involved in the process. But also, the phases of the two cycles, the Australis cycle and menstruation cycle. Dear students, it means at the end of this presentation, I expect you students who are listening to me, you'll be able to explain the occurrence of menstruation cycle and the Australis cycle. I mean where the process occurs, but also the importance of menstruation cycle, and also the hormones that are involved in the two cycles, menstruation cycle and the Australis cycle, and also phases of these two cycles. It means the Australis cycle and the menstruation cycle. Why I decided to come with these two concepts? It is because, according to the experience, it has shown that many students face difficulty to respond correctly to the questions that are asked from these concepts. Therefore, it's my wish that at the end of this presentation, students will be able to answer various questions that can be asked from these concepts. To start with, let me take you quickly to importance of menstruation cycle and the Australis cycle. As I've said, these cycles occur in mammals, but we have two groups of mammals on the basis of their reproductive cycle. We have first primate mammal, primate mammals. These are the ones that undergo menstruation cycle. And these includes human being, chimpanzee, etc., etc. Just to mention a few of them. But also there is non-primate mammal. Non-primate mammals undergo Australis cycle. This includes sheep, goats, antelopes, to mention just a few of them. Therefore, if these are mammals that undergo Australis cycle and the menstruation cycle, why these cycles are important to them? First of all, you must understand that menstruation cycle and the Australis cycle indicate that a female mammal has attained sexual maturity. By undergoing menstruation cycle and the Australis cycle, it indicates that that particular animal, in a particular female, has now undergone the sexual maturity, and that it is able to undertake all reproductive responsibility. But also, during these cycles, it's when the follicles matured. It means from the primary follicle to secondary follicle. These maturation occur during these cycles. But also, it is during this cycle when the secondary oocytes are released into the oviduct. But also, it is during the cycles when the male gamete and the female gametes fuse together. To form a diploid zygote. Therefore, in order for reproductive processes to take place, particularly sexual reproduction, it means these cycles are very important. But also, let's also remind the hormones involved in this cycle. Menstrual cycle and the Australis cycle are all controlled by hormones. And these hormones are such as, there is follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. But also another hormone is estrogen. Another hormone is luteinizing hormone, also known as LH. And the last hormone is progesterone. Throughout this cycle, these hormones are involved to control different events. But also, to remind you, menstruation cycle involves different phases. Menstruation cycle has 4 phases. The first phase being Mastro Phase. Second phase being Follicular Phase. Third phase being Ovulatory Phase. And the last being Luteal Phase. These are phases of menstruation cycle. And since we have 2 cycles to be discussed here, but also their Australis cycle also has 4 phases. The first one is the Australis Phase. The second one is Progesterone. Third is Australis Phase. And the last is post. These are phases of each cycle: menstrual phase, menstrual cycle, and the Australis cycle. Dear students, after I have reminded you some important things that I'm going to cover through this presentation, but I want to tell you that my presentation will be guided by some questions that will touch different parts of these cycles. Therefore, since I have reminded you some important things that I expect to cover, now let us go to the first question that guides us to discuss the concept of menstruation cycle. The first question is briefly explain how each of the following hormones are involved in menstruation cycle. A. Follicle stimulating hormone. B. Estrogen. C. Luteinizing hormone. D. Progesterone hormone. Dear students, these questions takes us to 4 different hormones that are involved in this cycle, but in particular the menstruation cycle. Therefore, to answer this question, you will have to explain the role of follicle stimulating hormone in menstruation cycle. You will have to explain the role of estrogen cycle in menstruation cycle, the role of estrogen hormone in menstruation cycle, the role of luteinizing hormone in menstruation cycle, the role of progesterone hormone in menstruation cycle. Let us see follicle stimulating hormone. First of all, what is required here is to show what organ or gland produce the follicle stimulating hormone. This is produced by pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is stimulated by the hormones released by hypothalamus and release this hormone. This hormone is released into the bloodstream. And taken all the way to the ovary. In the ovary, it stimulates the following process to take place. One, it stimulates development of follicle. In other mammals, these involve several follicles. Therefore, the important function of the follicle stimulating hormone is to stimulate development of what? Of a follicle. But after the follicle has developed, it produces the estrogen hormone. The production of estrogen hormone by developed follicle takes us to part B of the question, the estrogen. Therefore, the estrogen is produced by developed follicle, and the role of it one, it repair the endometrium. Following menstrual flow, which is caused by the breakdown of the endometrium wall, the wall of the uterus must be repaired. The first function of the estrogen is to perform this process of repairing of the uterine wall, also known as proliferation. Second, it inhibits the production of follicle stimulating hormone by pituitary gland. That when the level of estrogen is high, the level of follicle stimulating hormone is high, and it has done its activity, it must be suppressed so that not more than one follicle is allowed to develop. The estrogen inhibits pituitary gland not to produce more follicle stimulating hormone. But third, the estrogen stimulates the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone. That after follicle has developed, the next phase will be the ovulation. And the hormone that will be responsible is luteinizing hormone. Therefore, the pituitary gland must be stimulated to produce luteinizing hormone for the next phase. But this hormone that is stimulated to be produced by estrogen takes us to third part of our question, luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is produced by pituitary gland. Under the influence of estrogen. The function of this hormone is 1. Stimulates development of corpus luteum. Luteinizing hormone stimulates development of corpus luteum. But another function of this hormone is to stimulate ovulation. That the follicle must open to release the oocyte into the oviduct. These are 2 functions of the luteinizing hormone. This hormone alerts the next phase, which will involve progesterone. The progesterone hormone in the menstruation cycle has also to do with development of endometrium. The uterine wall is thickened so that implantation can take place. This will involve supply of blood rich in oxygen and food nutrients. But also, another importance of the progesterone is to inhibit production of follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, because these hormones has done their work. Therefore, they are no longer needed in the female reproductive system. They must be stopped from the pituitary gland. The hormone which is responsible for this inhibitory effect is progesterone from the corpus luteum. Dear students, by having responded to that way, you will have answered this question correctly. What you need is to go back and explain the role of each hormone in the menstruation cycle. Let us now go to question number 2 and see how can it be asked from the same concept. Dear students, question number 2 says menstruation comprises 4 phases. Briefly explain events taking place in each phase. Menstruation has 4 phases, as I said before. But this question requires students to explain the events taking place in each phase. What you need to do here is to go direct to different phases. The first phase, as we said, we have Mastro Phase. This phase occurs as a result of the failure of fertilization to take place. And it is a result of a drop in progesterone hormone. When the progesterone hormone has just dropped, because no fertilization has taken place, is when the menstrual phase takes place. And it involves the breakdown of the endometrium. The uterine wall that was prepared for implantation breaks down. What is the result of this breaking down of endometrium? It means the breaking down of endometrium release the blood and other tissues from endometrium. The release of blood and other tissues from endometrium, collectively known as menstrual fluid. Also known as the menses. These are things that occur during menstruation phase. But how can a woman recognize herself that is about to undergo menstrual phase? There are some symptoms that a woman can feel. For instance, most of the women can feel stomach ache. Some other women can feel the lower back ache. But also sometimes the basal body temperature slightly lays up. And there are other symptoms. These are just few. The next phase is the follicular phase. This phase occurs just after menstruation phase. To respond to this question, you have to explain that it is during this phase the follicle stimulating hormone is produced from pituitary gland. Then you will have to tell the role of the follicle stimulating hormone, that it stimulates development of follicles from primary follicle to secondary. During this phase, the developed follicle produces estrogen. At the last stage of this phase, the level of estrogen is very high in the blood, stimulating the next phase. However, the estrogen also, apart from stimulating the next phase, it inhibits the production of the follicle stimulating hormone from pituitary gland. After follicular phase, there is ovulatory phase. This phase is stimulated by luteinizing hormone produced from pituitary gland. As we have seen here, the estrogen stimulates the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone. The luteinizing hormone stimulates the process of ovulation, which is the rupture open of follicle to release oocyte into the oviduct. These will be the events of the ovulatory phase. But also, the luteinizing hormone stimulates development of corpus luteum, that the ruptured follicle is stimulated to develop into the endocrine gland known as the corpus luteum, which produce the progesterone which will be used in the luteal phase. But in a female body, the ovulatory phase can be characterized by slight rise in basal body temperature. That the temperature slightly rise. But also there is discharge of slippery fluid from the vagina. These are mucus. But also, ovulation can be characterized by rise in sexual desire. These are just a few, but you can think more than that characterizing the ovulation. The next phase is Luteal Phase. This is the last phase in the menstruation cycle, and this occurs just after ovulation. Also, here you have to explain that the progesterone is produced. Progesterone hormone is produced by the corpus luteum. This progesterone hormone stimulates development of endometrium from uterine wall. Development of endometrium involves development of blood vessels, that supplies oxygen and food nutrients. In such a way, the uterine wall, it becomes thick, ready for implantation to take place only if fertilization was successfully taken place during ovulatory phase. But also, another event that the progesterone stimulates the pituitary gland not to produce luteinizing hormone. Since luteinizing hormone has done its work of ovulation, it is no longer needed. The progesterone inhibits pituitary gland not to produce more luteinizing hormone because the process by itself requires only one oocyte to be released during the menstrual cycle from one ovary. By so doing this, you will have responded to this question correctly, what you need is to go directly to different phases and explain the role of hormones and what takes place during that phase. You will have responded to this question correctly. Let us now go to question number 3 so that we can see how other questions also can be asked from the same area. Question number 3, dear students, reads as follows. Why should follicle stimulating hormone, FSH, be inhibited when pregnancy occurs? Why should follicle stimulating hormone be inhibited when pregnancy occurs? To answer this question, you need to go to the roles of FSH. The role of FSH is to stimulate development of follicle, contain oocytes. If that is the function, the primary function, and if the oocyte has been released during ovulatory phase, why do we need this hormone? We don't need this hormone anymore. If this hormone is allowed to be produced when the pregnancy has just occurred, it means more follicles will be developed. Will be developed in the same gestation period. And this is not needed. We don't need multiple pregnancies in the same gestation period. After all, the female reproductive system, particularly human being, is not suited to accommodate multiple pregnancies that occur just when pregnancy has just taken place. But also, it means this will lead to other processes such as ovulation, because developed follicle will produce estrogen, which will stimulate the production of luteinizing hormone from pituitary gland. And the luteinizing hormone, as we've said, will lead to stimulation of ovulation. Since the follicle is developed, the ovulation must take place. This is not needed in this case. Therefore, it must be inhibited because only one follicle is allowed to develop into the female reproductive system during menstruation cycle from one ovary. From one ovary. If 2 ovaries develop follicles, that is not the case. But once the pregnancy has taken place, we don't need more follicles to be developed because it will lead to unnecessary multiple pregnancy, which the female reproductive system is not suited for. Question number 4, why should the thickness of the endometrium reach its peak at the time of ovulation? Why should the thickness of endometrium reach its peak at the time of ovulation? It means when the ovulation takes place, the endometrium has just developed. But why? The development of endometrium is very important. Therefore, to respond to this question, it means that you'll have to go to the role of endometrium. During follicular phase, there is follicle stimulating hormone being produced and also the estrogen. And I said the estrogen has various responsibilities. Stimulate production of luteinizing hormone, stimulate the repair of endometrium that has just broken down. This repairing of endometrium, also known as proliferation, means that the endometrium rebuilds again after regression. Start to rebuild again after regression. It means at the time of ovulation, the endometrium has attained a certain thickness that will allow implantation to take place. Implantation to take place if fertilization was taking place during ovulation. Therefore, the endometrium must be thick so that if the zygote has formed during ovulation and upon transformation to embryo, it will implant into the endometrium. Therefore, the endometrium must get thick to prepare itself for implantation. That is why it must get thick and reach its peak at the time of what? Of ovulation. Let us see another question that can come from the same concept. Dear students, we have done with the question number 4. Let us now see question number 5 and see how this question can be responded. The question number 5 reads as follows: differentiate between the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. This question gives us another concept that menstruation cycle involves ovarian cycle and uterine cycle. What is needed here is to differentiate between these two cycles. The ovarian cycle occurs in the ovary, and the uterine cycle occurs in the uterus. It means to respond to this question, you will have to go to various events occurring into different phases of this cycle. For instance, the ovarian cycle involves 3 phases, namely 1, the follicular phase; 2nd is ovulatory phase; and the 3rd is luteal phase. If you remember, these phases were explained when I presented to you different events occurring in menstruation cycle. I did what occur in follicular phase, and also I shown what occur in the ovulatory phase and luteal phase. It means you will have to consider different events occurring to these phases. Coming to uterine cycle, this occurs in the uterus. What is needed there, you also have to consider different phases of the uterine cycle. For instance, the uterine cycle has Mastro Phase. As the first phase. And the second there is proliferation phase. And the third, there is secretory phase. These are phases of occurring in uterine cycle. Therefore, to respond to this question, you will have to consider different aspects occurring in uterine cycle and ovarian cycles, so that this question will be responded correctly. You remember what you learned at your school regarding to ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle. Just to remind you that you will have to go directly to different phases, different events, hormones involved, and the other aspects occurring in these cycles. Let us go to question number 60. And this question comes from the area of Australis cycle. It reads as follows. Explain how the Australis cycle takes place in mammals. The Australis cycle, as I said, occur in non-primate mammals. Non-primates, such as goats, sheep, elephants, just to mention a few. In a non-primate mammal, this cycle is what initiates the process of reproduction to take place. But this question requires to explain how this process occurs. To respond to this question, you have to go to different phases. Of the cycle. The first phase, if you remember, is the estrus. The estrus phase. The second phase is proestrus. The third phase is ostrus. And the last is oestrus. The events taking place into these different phases is not quite different from those taking place in the menstruation cycle. Only that during the estrus, the animal do not show any physical signs of sexual activity. No any signs of sexual activity. During proestrus, this phase is like follicular phase. It's during this phase the follicle stimulating hormone is produced from pituitary gland to stimulate development of follicles containing oocytes. And the follicles produce the estrogen. Therefore, if you remember well, the follicular phase, it is more or less the same as this phase. But next you have Australis Phase. This phase is similar to ovulatory phase. It's during which the luteinizing hormone is produced from pituitary gland. You will have to explain the role of luteinizing hormone, that it stimulates the rupture open of follicle, contain oocyte, that is ovulation. This luteinizing hormone stimulates also development of corpus luteum, so that the progesterone hormone is produced in the next phase to prepare the endometrium for implantation. Therefore, you have to consider the Australis Phase. The next phase of the Australis cycle is the proestrus. Dear students, the post-Australis phase is a phase merging to fertilization, merging to pregnancy. It means if during ovulation fertilization was taken place, it is during this phase where the pregnancy develops. It means the progesterone is produced from the corpus luteum that stimulates the development of the endometrium. So that implantation can take place. But if no fertilization, the endometrium regress. The endometrium regresses so slowly without discharge of blood. It's known as pseudo-pregnant. In which the female shows all symptoms of being pregnant, but not. Therefore, dear students, to respond to these questions, you will have to go to different phases of Australis cycle and explain what really takes place at each event. There, you will have explained or you will have answered this question. My dear students, I'm sure those who are listening to this presentation have got some important concepts from menstruation cycle and Australis cycle and other aspects related to these cycles. And these will also help you to answer different questions that can come from the same area. Thank you for listening. Goodbye. Till next time when I'll be presenting another interesting concept from human being reproduction.